And welcome to another Friday afternoon here at the United States Marshals Museum in Fort Smith, Arkansas, right on the banks of the Arkansas River. It is a beautiful day in Fort Smith. I really wish that we could have been out and let you see the river today. I'd hope to get there, but that just didn't happen. Anybody who shows up today, thank you for popping in to our now monthly live sessions, our first Friday lives. We used to be on Facebook all the time. All of those, I'll be dropping the link here in a little bit for where the stuff used to be. But I do want to share out the link here for the brick campaign we're still continuing to do. We have more than 200 bricks. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we've got more than 300 bricks out in our sidewalk going right outside the Hall of Honor all the way around to where our new statue, the Light Horseman, is located. If you get a chance to come down to Fort Smith, while the museum is not yet open to the public, feel free to wander around the property, take a look at the statue, take a look at the bricks, maybe peek in the windows a little bit. If you're lucky and we're here inside the building, we might be able to show you around a little bit, but I can't make any guarantees. So let's see here where we are. Lots of stuff going on right now at the museum. We're getting ready. We're looking forward to opening to the general public towards the end of next year. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be talking more about that. We have a number of big events coming up here at the museum over the next month. This Monday night, we've got Scott Samuels as the final installment on our lecture series, Talks on Tap, related to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. That's going to be coming up on Monday night. You can go to our webpage and go to, there's a link there on our webpage, there's a link on our Facebook, and I'll be, we might be dropping a link for that here in a bit. But just getting into our page, you'll be able to find that stuff. Also, Dr. Martin Luther King, we have him coming for our annual Evening in the Past. Evening in the Past is an annual event we have here every holiday season where we get a notable individual from American history to come in and talk to the public as a presenter. It's going to be a really great one this year. Is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it's going to be a very, just really, really special evening here at the museum. I'm just really looking forward to that. The rest of the staff is looking forward to it as well. And just really honestly, if you want to get the best idea of what we currently have going on in the way of programs, definitely stop by our Facebook page, stop by our webpage, and we are more than happy to let you know what we have going on. And let's see here where we are at. If you are dropped in, if you are watching us online, feel free to say hi. Feel free to let us know where you're from, where you're watching this at. And also, if you've got a question about what I'm going to be talking about today, by all means, just go ahead and ask that question. So, and if there's problems with the stream, holler at me. I'd be more than happy to see what I can do to resolve it. So, what I'm going to talk about today is something that's near and dear to my heart. I want to talk about World War II. I'm going to talk about the Marshals during World War II. I've been studying history for a long time. Part of that interest was in military history. Part of it was World War II stuff. My grandfather served in World War II in the European theater. And I've got a lot of interest in the subject. And 5 years ago, I'd been working here at the museum for about a year at that point. And I get a phone call from a deputy at the district office in Hawaii. And he asks, just basically, they were sitting around on the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, asking, well, what were the deputies doing? And my first answer to him was, well, nothing really, because it was a Sunday morning. But my really quick answer beyond that was that, well, the deputies probably weren't doing a whole lot, because the marshals at that time were really just frontline at the courthouse. They were doing papers. They were taking care of a lot of the business that had been created. They weren't really the fugitive hunters that they are now, or the fugitive hunters that they were in the American West when Fort Smith was kind of the heart of operations for the Marshal Service at the time, even though the Marshals were active across the country from 1789 all the way to that point. They're just during the first half of the 20th century, a lot of the attention on the Marshals had really been drawn away by agencies like the Federal Bureau of Investigations, by the Treasury or Prohibition, and other revenue-type agencies that ended up becoming alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. But a lot of that was really just, there were still a lot of jobs that the Marshals were doing that were also getting pushed over to other areas. And so they were picking up jobs as they had to, but they were also picking up jobs much the same way as they do today, jobs that other agencies didn't touch. And so I'm going to talk about this a bit today, and I'm going to really just hopefully you guys will learn something as you watch this, and we'll be able to talk about what we've got going on. Marshals during World War II, and I'm going to be alternating back and forth between this view right here, me as the talking head, and I'll be showing the slides a little bit closer up. There's lots of amazing stuff that's going on. Some of the history that you're going to find out about during here, if you want to learn more about the 20th century history of the Marshals Service, I would very definitely recommend you pick up a copy of Dave Turk's book, Forging the Star. This is the modern history of the Marshals Service. There is a previous history of the Marshals Service, the Lawman, written by the previous historian for the Marshals Service, Ted Calhoun. You can find this one on Amazon or AD eBooks. It's been out of print for years. Dave Turk's book you can find brand new in a lot of places. And it's really just some good histories, really, really great stuff to study. But a lot of what you're going to see here are articles that I was able to pull out of newspapers.com and really just kind of helping us learn some of this story. So again, if you have any questions, comments, just go ahead and shout them out. So, United States Marshals, where were we in 1940? The Marshals Service had grown from the original 13 districts up to about 85 districts at that time. There were only about 1,500 marshals across, well, there are 85 marshals, about 1,500 deputy U.S. Marshals, which right now there's about 3,500 deputy U.S. Marshals and 94 districts. So U.S. Marshals at that point, as they were under George Washington, they were still being appointed by the president. Almost no requirements for background, for qualifications, for any of the stuff that they had in their abilities and their knowledge, their skill set. Senate would have to confirm them, same way as today. The deputy U.S. Marshals at that point, though, were pretty much, they were just being, they were just pretty much just confirmed at will. They would be the friends of the U.S. Marshal. They would be people that the U.S. Marshal would know are capable of doing their job. Sometimes it'd just be their buddies. Sometimes it'd just be there just as a cushy political type job. But and a lot of the jobs that they get are very much similar. It's the headline here. This takes place just on December 7th. And so Preacher in Fayette County in Atlanta, well, in Georgia, he turns in a suggestion on a guy who he thinks is doing some sort of breaking liquor laws. So he turns the guy in. Deputy goes out to try to arrest him. The guy's not there. The guy finds out that there's a warrant for his arrest, and then he ends up threatening this preacher. So the marshals get involved there because the U.S. attorney doesn't want their witnesses messed with. So this is one of those things that just has always kind of been there for the marshals and continues to be there for the marshals. So the job still pretty much is the same in a lot of ways. You still have a lot of the court security aspects of their job. You have a lot of just serving papers, writs, orders, whether a confiscation of assets, forfeiture of assets, just anything like that, anything that comes out of criminal or civil cases in a federal court. They still have the requirement to move transfer of prisoners around the country. That's something that is quite common across across the entire country as they're doing their jobs. And they also have to assist other federal officers. Most dangerous job the marshals had for about 50 years, starting in about the 1880s, 1890s, up through about the 1940s and 50s, is working with revenue agents in order to seize legally produced alcohol bus stills, things like that, simply because the agents of these other agencies may not have arrest abilities, but they can bring along a deputy. The deputy can arrest them for the federal crimes. And so that's really kind of the most dangerous element of the job for a very long time, transfer prisoners and assisting other agencies. And so just for even that confusion, this is a question in just like a regular Q&A section of the newspaper in Spokane, Washington, from somebody asking, can anyone except the U.S. Deputy Marshal serve a federal warrant? And if the constable serves a warrant, does he have to do so as a constable or a deputy marshal? And the marshal's office is the opinion, only a marshal or deputy legally serve the federal warrant, but any officer can legally make the arrest and bring the prisoner in if the marshal tells them to do so. So, I mean, that's pretty much a lot of the same stuff today as they continue on. Prisoner transfers. Since the beginning of the agency all the way to today, if you're familiar with Con Air, more officially known as JPATS, the Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, small air force that the marshals have, they transfer regularly with, granted, you don't count 2020, 2021 and COVID in the mix, they've been transferring on average more than 1,000 prisoners a day. So 350, 375,000 prisoners a year transferred through Marshal Service hands daily, like recently. During this time frame, you're looking at about 250,000 prisoners transferred each year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. Often a very dangerous duty, and during the time we're talking about, it was not really well organized outside of the local district's office. Keep in mind, at this time, they were just starting to move to the point of having something resembling a headquarters for marshals at the Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney General's office. At this point, each marshal in each district around the country was essentially their own boss. They did have to report to the Attorney General, but there was no real organization across the country from one district to the next to the next. And so if there was a prisoner that had to be transferred, say, from, let's see, Nebraska to McNeil Island in Washington State, chances are there'd be a deputy from Nebraska putting those prisoners in their personal car in Nebraska, driving them all the way to McNeil Island in Washington, and having to stop every night to throw them into the local county jail for an overnight stay, and getting all the way there, and then having to drive all the way back. And they may be driving full of a car one way and nobody in the car the way back. And so that started to get changed over time, but that was really until the 50s and 60s the organization really started to key up. But here's an example right here of prisoners taken to Leavenworth. Charles Robinson, U.S. Marshal, left for Leavenworth, Kansas with Glenn Heasley, who received a 5-year sentence. W.J. Limpy, Deputy Marshal, returned from Leavenworth, where he committed Stanley Weber's Sturgis, who was sentenced to 7.5 years. When he got back there, he departed for the Rosebud Reservation to serve federal court papers. Jace Johnson, Deputy Marshal, due back from Sandstone, where he committed prisoners to the Federal Correctional Institute. And so you get a lot of these cases, a lot of the time, as people are trying to continue to do these jobs, and just part of these prisoners, one of them who was transferred, I kind of got a chuckle out of this. One of the prisoners who was transferred at the beginning of the war, this is during December of 1941, Louisiana Governor Richard Leach, he was the first governor of Louisiana to have to go to prison. I know that some of us might joke nowadays about how many Louisiana governors, like I grew up in Illinois, so I know a lot about governors going to prison. How many Louisiana governors have been to prison? And so Richard Leach was the first one of a long line. He was arrested and charged with misuse of federal funds, everything from misusing WPA supplies for the building of his house and others, reselling excess oil beyond what the government was allowing them to produce. They were also looking at like truck sales to government agencies. It was crazy. So he ended up getting 10 years in the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta. And so this was big news during that month of December is where is Governor Leach and former Governor Leach? And most of them are mentioned the U.S. Marshal or the Deputy U.S. Marshals who were involved in that process. So we also get other prisoner transfers. And this is the image that I had on our advertisements for this particular presentation. Is you've got these two guys in the middle, Chrisley and Walker. They were both soldiers who were AWOL from down in Alabama. They ended up stealing some cars, worked their way up into Indiana before they were captured. They get captured, they get tried, they're going to be sent to a correctional facility, and they're on their way, and they're not even out of the state of Indiana. And a third prisoner who's in the car apparently tries to choke out the deputy. The deputy tries to get his gun around on them. These two guys get the gun away from the deputy. The deputy pulls the car over. They break out of the car, and they steal that car. And then, excuse me, they tried to they steal the car. They tried to get away, and they end up getting captured by a couple of other local law enforcement officers, returned back to the Marshal Service, and then get taken on their way. That deputy was very lucky he didn't get killed in the process, because there have been a number of deputies killed by prisoners as they've been in the middle of transfers. And oddly, during the 1940s, after 1940, from 1940 until 1951, there are no line of duty deaths. So it's really, to me, it's kind of odd, given everything that's going on during this time frame, how almost safe it is to be a deputy marshal. Some of the changes that are coming up. The organization starts to really go through a number of changes. You go from this almost still Wild West idea of each district is their own little fiefdom. Each district is doing their own job, responding only to the court there in their area or directives from the U.S. Attorney General's office. And so you're finally starting to make those steps towards putting the deputies under civil service. So it's no longer a buddy network that hires deputies. The deputies are now going in as people who are learning about, just like they actually have to pass a civil service test, they have to pass an examination, they have to make some certain qualifications that they all have to fit. And so you can't just hire anybody to come in and do this job. There's going to be better training. As you saw, there's a couple of different cases of bad situations happening with some of the deputy marshals, and in that case, in the car, the deputy was going for his gun, but he loses the gun and ends up losing the prisoners. There are other cases. 1940, there were a series of, this is in Washington State, a series of murders from a sniper who was killing black men. And in this particular case, John Eklund, he's about 23, 24, 25, is found guilty of the killing of a 17-year-old black man in Washington State using a rifle. And he's found guilty, but then while he's going through his trial, he escapes from a couple of deputies who are not armed. And so people started to really examine the policies. During this time frame, a lot of deputies were not armed in the way of doing their job. And so as we start to go through here, there was an FBI report about the escape of Elkland from these two deputy marshals while being transferred to a district jail. And then it comes a little bit later on in here where we're talking about how those deputy marshals in some judicial districts now receive training in the use of firearms. This is far from a universal practice. United States Marshals, approximately 85 in number, are political appointments subject to confirmation by the Senate. There are about 1,100 deputy marshals in the United States. Early this year, the deputy marshals were brought under civil service, and vacancies in the various districts were filled from the civil service eligibility lists. And then here we mentioned, according to the Department of Justice, deputy marshals handle about 250,000 prisoners a year. During the fiscal year 1940, the escape of 8 prisoners from deputy marshals. 1941, there were 4. During fiscal year 1941, there were 13. So with that, you start to have a very definitely moving towards more professionalism, moving towards regular arming of all the deputies. I can't imagine deputy marshals not going about their job with a gun. I mean, with just going around unarmed. That just blows my mind. One of the big changes, though, and this is one of those things that if nothing else really helps out historians, is that they finally settle on a single badge. This is the first widespread badge design that's used by the Marshal Service. Prior to this, each district could have their own badge design. Some designs looked similar to this. Some designs were the old circle with the star in the middle of it. Some of them were a shield ornament of some sort. There's so many different types of designs that you can never say, oh, they never did this, because they often did. Somebody somewhere in a district someplace would do something crazy with a badge. I've seen at least one U.S. Marshals badge that was made by Tiffany's. So it's pretty neat, the variety, but it's nice that all of a sudden, 1941, you get a specific design, so they all have the same badge. This is the first one where you'll see numbers on the back of the badge. The numbers don't really pertain to anything. They're just essentially a property number. You would see these in the hands of deputies as they were serving papers during the Civil Rights era, especially. You would see them in New Orleans. You would see them in Ole Miss. You would see them in other parts of the country as deputies were coming out and using them as part of their job. There are 3 different titles shown on these badges: United States Marshal, Chief Deputy Marshal, and Deputy Marshal. And just nicknamed the Ike badge. Next slide here. So some of the changes that happened with the war, obviously you're going to start seeing there's a growth of some of the use of land around the country. Here's an example up in Nebraska, where they were getting ready to build an ordnance plant over west of Lincoln, Nebraska, outside of a town of Wahoo. It's a little bit east of where the town, if you look at the Wahoo on the map, it's a little bit east and south of where Wahoo is. This particular area, though, they were needing 27 square miles for this bomb plant that they were building out there. And so that's a lot of land. Just thinking about quarter sections, that's a ton of land. So you're looking at 180 landowners, other parties. There were city governments, county governments were involved simply because of the taxation issues. If they needed to worry about taxes as a government entity, they might have interest in this. So in this court case, there were papers that had to be delivered by deputy marshals to everybody who was involved. And so that is more than 150 people owning land, but then about another 30 other entities that had to receive the papers. And so this is just one of those jobs. As boring as delivering papers is, it was part of what keeps the country going. One of my favorite quotes from a good friend of mine, who's a retired deputy U.S. Marshal and U.S. Marshal, is, if the courts aren't running, the country's not running. And the deputy marshals are the ones who make sure that the U.S. Marshal and the deputy marshals make sure the courts keep running. And so this particular case, O'Grady, this is Deputy U.S. Marshal Joseph O'Grady. He had about 180 papers to serve. The summons in part reads, "You're hereby summoned and required to serve upon Joseph T. Votava, attorney for the United States, an answer to the complaint within 20 days after service." And so basically saying, hey, we're wanting to take your land. A lot of people had already agreed to a purchase price, and now they're going to show up. And if you disagree with it, we're going to go ahead and get it reappraised for you and see if you want to take that one. Otherwise, we're just going to take it. Obviously, espionage. Lots of different things going on. You've got Germans who had naturalized to the United States. You have a couple of cases of German soldiers who were brought aground on U-boats and then were helped out by American citizens of German descent. You have German prisoners who got into contact with American citizens of German descent or Germans who were in the middle of naturalizing. And so you have the marshals having to keep track of all of that. It's really just very, very busy. Here's 2 different articles, 42 and 43. One, they had to capture a guy before he got out of the country. He was down in El Paso. Another person was convicted and was sentenced to death. And then you see, like other cases, sabotage, where you have the person, this Herbert Hans Haupt was a saboteur. And that saboteur ends up as part of a treason trial. where everybody else in the family, who pretty much knew what was going on, they were having to go up against this. The defendants, Mr. and Mrs. Hans Max Haupt, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Frohling, young Haupt's uncle and aunt, and Mr. and Mrs. Otto Richard Vergen, are charged with concealing the Nazi saboteur in Chicago and handling money he brought from Germany while knowing of his sabotage schemes. If convicted by the jury, the penalty will be fixed by the court. The minimum is 5 years in prison. The maximum is death. And there to the left side of the image, you can see that's Deputy U.S. Marshal Lewis Kaplan wearing one of those brand new badges that they just had issued in 1941. And then you get other cases. Hoarding and rationing. One of those subjects a lot of us don't think about is the number of people who are just, if you're dealing with rationing, and there were many, many cases, these are just two of them I saw. The guy on the right, he was being held on rationing charges. He was a county employee in Philadelphia. That's Deputy U.S. Marshal behind him who's grabbing him. He's being held on a $5,000 bail. This is $5,000 in the 40s. That's a ton of cash. Charged with uttering, possessing, and publishing counterfeit ration stamps. And then you have the article on the left that the mayor of this town was being accused. This is up in New York. He was being accused of selling horseradish at oversealing prices because there were price fixing entities in the country to make sure that no hoarding was going on, to make sure that everything was being rationed and that nobody was trying to gouge for prices. And so this guy was selling above what he was supposed to sell. So deputy marshals showed up basically to arrest the mayor. I came across other articles where you have reporters and others getting involved trying to nail down markets where they were like black market meat sales, black market metal sales. There was an article I saw with some deputies having to show up. They ended up taking control of an entire, it's essentially a scrapyard, because the people who were running the scrapyard, they were not able to get the price that they wanted for the metal that they had. They weren't able to get that price from the government, so they weren't selling it. They were just holding on to it until eventually they figured at some point they'd be able to sell it. So the government essentially came in with a court order saying, okay, if you're not going to sell it to anybody, we're taking it, because they needed to have the metal for the war effort. So, I mean, it's just really just some interesting cases, and just the variety of cases that, while a lot of this stuff does go on today in the way of the federal government taking over private property after a legal issue, or just other elements of this, all of a sudden with the war, you get so many just different elements of this, that like the rationing and counterfeiting of some of these materials. And if anybody has a question, I would love to hear it. This right here, and then if you happen to be watching this stream later on after it goes fully live on YouTube, by all means, feel free to throw a question in the comment, and somebody from the museum will see that and will be able to talk to you about that. This has got to be one of the strangest things I've ever come across. I came across this because there was a marshal I was researching, a guy named Earl Bauer. Earl was involved with the Marshal Service Pistol Team. He was an instructor. We've got a number of things here in the collection that were from him, including a book of clippings of different events he was involved in. And at one point, he transferred the person that we're about to talk about from Seattle, Washington, down to San Diego. As part of this, it just, every step along the line in this person's next 4 years, the marshals are involved in some way, shape, or form. Well, there's one event you'll see here that the marshals aren't involved in. But from 1941 until 1945, the marshals just keep touching on this woman's life. And she keeps touching on the marshal's life, and probably, I'd be almost willing to bet that more than any other convicted person during World War II, she probably got more mileage out of the marshal service than anybody else did. So, Lindy Madison Zion. As far as I can tell, her birth name is Lindy Madison. I say as far as I can tell because, as you might be able to see in this article, uh, she has a number, like she's gone by Norma Arlene Kamegas Zion. Zion is, or Zioni is her married name. As far as I can tell, Lindy Mae Madison is her maiden name. Uh, what is going on with her is in June 16th, 1941. Keep in mind, this is before the war starts. She's arrested in San Diego for wearing military uniforms and pretending like she is military. She is wearing the uniform of an Army Air Corps captain, Marine dress blue elements, some olive drab stuff. She's got captain's rank from the Army Air Corps and from the Marine Corps. She's got a Marine Corps emblem on her uniform, and it's just the craziest thing you've ever. Here she is right here, and there's the Marine Corps emblem on this particular outfit that she is wearing. So that's June 6, 1941, she's arrested. This is just a long, strange trip. Make sure, there we go. So July 11th, she gets 2 years probation by a federal judge because this is a federal crime. Let's see here. Called herself a captain. Here she's called Norma Arlene Kanegas Zion. That's the problem, is you can't hardly find her because she keeps changing her name during the course of this whole thing. The judge gives her 2 years probation for pretending to be an Army Air Corps captain and obtaining money while masquerading as such. So essentially, the historic version of what today we would refer to as stolen valor. And so, as they're going through this, in his words, I think you have a great interest in service, but you must not wear a uniform of the military service. In times like these, the government has to be very careful. I think what you have needed for a long time is a good spanking. It boggles the mind that somebody from a bench would be saying that, but that's exactly what happened. So the court was informed that the woman declaring herself to be the only female captain in the Air Corps wore a fantastic combination of Marine dress blues with imitation Army buttons, an Army captain's insignia on the shoulders, an Air Corps insignia on the coat lapel, and a Marine dress white cap. You would think it would stop here, but it doesn't. So that's July of 41, 2 years probation in San Diego. You find it might be 3 years later on. There's some confusion about this. 1942, the following May, she's arrested in Seattle. Jail woman flying tiger as imposter. So she shows up in Seattle talking to a high school in the area. They had a whole assembly, and she's there in this outfit that they show in this image. And she's there talking about how she was a flying tiger under Claire Chennault in Burma. So if you're not familiar with the Flying Tigers, it's the American volunteer group that was flying against the Japanese over Burma. What's his name? Who ended up being Baba Black Sheep, Greg Bullington, Pappy Bullington. He was part of that for a while. So she claims that she was there, and while she was doing that job, that she shot down 17 Japanese fighter craft while flying with the American volunteer group in Burma. Yeah, that never happened. So she's sitting here and standing before the court in the flying toga she wore, but stripped of the insignia, in which she told a Queen Anne High School assembly recently she bagged 17 Japanese planes. So she told Judge Black she wore the equipment as a token of my engagement. That's all there is to it, and that she had come to Seattle to establish residence, obtain a divorce, and marry a Marine whose insignia she wore. And there's more about the divorce later, but that's where the name Zion comes from. That's her married name. She married a guy who was an Army recruiter, and you'll find a little bit more out about that story as we go on. So she's given 4 months when she's in Seattle. Keep in mind that she was just convicted of a federal crime for which she was already on probation in San Diego. So if you guess that she's heading back down to San Diego, you are correct. So she gets taken back down to San Diego, still wearing her sky blue uniform, which carries a number of insignia, carrying a portable radio. She left jauntily under federal guard after spending a night in a local jail. So she's on her way back. This is in LA. She's on her way back down to San Diego in October of 42 for part of her probation. So at some point, apparently, she's released. A year later, she shows up in Reno, gets arrested again for wearing the uniform. And so she's now again arrested and charged with illegally wearing an Army officer's uniform, Norma Arlene Camegas Zion, also known, and here's where she picks up a new name, Randall May Victory. By some cases, she calls herself Lady Victory. Appeared in federal court, San Diego. Wants to go to Canada to join the Canadian Auxiliary Air Force, Air Service. And so she can't do that, she says, because apparently these crimes have also prevented her from her passport from being allowed to. She can't have entry into Canada with the crimes that she has against her. So you just cannot make this stuff up. And every step along the way, she's being handled by Deputy U.S. Marshals. I wish I could go back in time and talk to these men and women to find out what was going on. And I do say men and women very specifically because anytime that there was a female defendant, regularly they would have an office clerk or sometimes a legitimate female deputy who would be coming in and having to escort female defendants around the court property. So finally strikes, February 12th, 1944, she gets divorced, has it handed to her. Baroness Munchausen loses mate, if you know the stories about Baron Munchausen. So 23-year-old Norma Arlene Zion, her spouse Walter Zion was granted a divorce in Jersey City Chancery Court. She deserted him in August 1939. It was her love of uniforms that brought them together and the same love that separated them. Because he was in the Army as a recruiter in 1938 when they met. They went out for 7 weeks. They get married. He gets discharged from the Army. And then they went to Jersey City from Vancouver, Washington, where they met. They get to Jersey City because Norma wanted to, quote, see 2 World's Fairs in 1 year. She'd seen the Golden Gate Exposition in San Francisco, wanted to see this new one. And then so Walter apparently finally figured out, like after she took off, finally figured out where she was and was able to file papers. And so they are divorced now at this point. Which leads all to another thing. Now, here she's already been arrested and had spent time in Seattle, San Diego, and Reno. She takes her act further east, goes to Nebraska, and is arrested in Lincoln, this time under the name of Ashley Victory. And she goes under a $1,000 bond awaiting appearance. And by this point, she faced Federal Bureau of Investigation charges of unlawfully wearing decorations and regalia resembling the uniform of the Royal Australian Air Force without authority of law, and having in her possession insignia of the U.S. Air Corps. So now she's going by Randall Ashley Leal Victory, alias Lady Ashley Victory, alias Mrs. Walter Zion. And this is just insane, the whole thing. So she gets picked up by the chief of police in York, Nebraska, taken to Grand Island for arraignment, and then they have a preliminary hearing. They go on from there. By this point, she has, as they describe here, a pronounced blonde, referring to her as Lady Victory, blonde, with a black streak moving through the pompadour of her mannish coiffure, stands erect at 5'6", weighs 117 pounds. When fingerprinted by U.S. Marshal Joseph O'Grady, she wore blue slacks, a blue shirt, black leather belt, and gold earrings. Self-tattooed on her left arm are insignia of the Australian Air Force and the U.S. Marine Corps. I've got tattoos. I've been tattooed. I cannot imagine self-tattooing the Australian Air Force and the U.S. Marine Corps emblems. It's just crazy. So Lady Victory first brushed with the FBI at San Diego. A year later at Seattle, Also allegedly claimed kinship with the late Kaiser Wilhelm, Queen Wilhelmina of Holland, and King Carol of Romania, and reportedly said she twice was decorated by General Douglas MacArthur. So, yeah, this is... And she ends up, she's sentenced to 6 months. She's already served 3 of it. And so they keep referring to her as lady, and the whole time that she's on the stand, she keeps speaking with a British accent by these accounts. And I would love to find out more about her story, but this right here is about where it ends. Some other interesting stories. I know that one of the things we have to watch out for, especially with a lot of these different things, is that some of the stories that we've heard about in the past, they don't have a really good way of nailing down what actually happened. I know specifically one story that got told a lot. Deputy U.S. Marshal Helen Crawford, who legitimately was a deputy in Texas, who legitimately served for a very long time, and was a pioneer as a deputy marshal in a female deputy marshal in Texas, much less in the age as a deputy. However, one of the things that she told stories about as she got older was a story about how she took over a German U-boat that had been captured and was brought ashore in Texas. And I have yet to be able to find any sign of that story actually being legitimate. There's a very small number of U-boats that were captured and brought to the United States. Either they captured off the East Coast or off Florida. As far as I know, I have not been able to nail down the source of that story or anything to corroborate her stories about having to take over this U-boat when it was brought ashore. So if somebody out there knows that story, I would love to hear about it, because I have not been able to corroborate that story, and I really don't think it actually happened. It's a great story. I would love for it to be true, but we'll have to find out. Here we are. We are more than a half hour in, almost 45 minutes into it. If anybody at any point watching this has any questions, I would love for you to pass it along and let us know in the comments. We are more than happy to chat with folks about what the Marshals Service does, what the Marshals Museum does, our plans for opening in 2022, and just how we get our job done around here. I very much look forward to talking with anybody that has a question. If you've got anything going on, by all means, please feel free to give us a shout here or through our Facebook page. I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple of links to throw up here. Let's see here. I am looking at this. This is what happens when every once in a while I'll be able to have somebody else here helping me out with the stream, but unfortunately, situation being what it is, we were not able to do that today. But by all means, I know we haven't had a lot of viewers today, but if over time as you watch this, by all means ask us questions. We're more than happy to answer them. And if nothing else, I hope that everybody has a great day and is able to take care of anything that they can take care of. Thank you very much, and you guys have a wonderful day, and we will talk to you all later.